Clause 7.2 talks about competence. Naturally, we're speaking about the competence of employees, and if we were to go directly into what the standard is saying is that the organization shall determine the necessary competences of persons doing work under its control that affects its information security performance, that these persons are competent on the basis of appropriate education, training or experience, where applicable take actions to acquire the necessary competence and evaluate the effectiveness of actions taken, and retain appropriate documented information as evidence of competence. So what are we saying here in English, rather in plain English? So first of all, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to define the different job titles that are relevant for your organization. So in the organization chart, you would have identified who, or rather what are the job titles that are relevant to your organization. Okay, so in this case we're noticing that we have these different job titles, and here we're effectively thinking, so for each of these job titles, what are the competence that is needed, what are the knowledge or skills or experience that the person needs to have to effectively do their job in that capacity for our organization. Okay, and as you can understand, the standard will not tell you what type of qualifications a person needs to have in all the job titles that exist in the world. So the standard is saying that you are going to ensure that these persons are competent on the basis of, so whether we're checking for education, training, or experience, the standard leaves that vague, and it is up to you to determine what are the requirements. And let's take an example. For example, let's talk about developers. Okay, so in terms of developers, if we were to go to the job titles, to the job descriptions, and find that of developers. Okay, so as you can see here, there are different types of work that the developers have to do coming out of the processes relating to the management system, okay, and other types of communication. We need to make sure that the competencies required are defined for these people. If for example, we have development, since we have developers, our organization must have development work, and here we might determine that for us to feel more confident that our development is done in an information security friendly way, then we would want to have our developers to be familiar with the OWASP principles, okay, with the OWASP top 10 fundamentals. Now, how can we confirm that the person has this type of competence? It can be because they've been, maybe it was part of their academic training, or maybe they've had specific training on OWASP, or maybe they've worked with a company who employed the OWASP techniques or principles. Maybe they've worked for a company and they have that type of experience from their past working experience. Moreover, for where applicable, we have to take the necessary actions to acquire the necessary competence. So if they don't have this type of training, we need to give our employees this type of training, and we're going to evaluate the effectiveness of the actions taken. So for example, after giving them the training, if we think that this is a high risk competence, then we might want to do some type of quiz, some type of evaluation to make sure that they've actually understand the concepts that were being delivered in this particular training. Last but not least, we have to retain appropriate documented information as evidence to make sure that we can show that the person has actually undergone the training, whether with our organization, in their previous work experience, so we'll need to keep a copy of the CV, or through other internal or external training that the person might have done. So applicable actions can include the provision of training, mentoring, reassignment of current employees, or hiring or contracting competent persons. Okay, so we can employ different techniques to make sure that the people are competent in what they have to do. So naturally, this clause is very important because resources, one of the most important resources in any organization is its people, and therefore we have to make sure that they are adequately trained on the topic. Okay, and clause 6.2 builds on clause 6. On the vague clause 7.1, excuse me, where it is saying that we have to ensure that employees are adequately trained and have the knowledge they need to be able to do their job. Now, as I've explained in the organization chart, we're going to define the different job titles that exist in the organization. And for each job title, we have to have some type of job description which defines the roles and responsibilities and the competencies that are needed by that person to do their specific job, okay? In terms of information security. So each person must have some type of a job description, okay? They can have, of course, more than one job description if they are if they have been assigned more than one job title. And for each of the competencies that are listed for the job description for that particular role, the person who has been assigned that specific role must have the competence that are needed. Therefore, when it comes to clause 7.2, we have to have job descriptions, we have to have a training plan, because making sure that people are knowledgeable before or when they join the company isn't enough, especially when it comes to information security. Things are always changing, evolving, so it's very important to keep on training people on and reminding people about some fundamentals. For example, phishing emails or phishing attempts are getting more complex over time, especially once again with the advent of AI. Therefore, it is very important for us to have a training plan that keeps our employees' eyes open on any such risks. Okay, so we need to have a training plan for all people, for all the training that we're going to give them this year. And finally, we can have some type of training records to make sure that people are being actually trained on ISO standards and on other elements within the management system. Now, when it comes to having this type of training plan, we can either use the old-fashioned Excel sheet, which, mind you, it works. It's worked for the past decades and it still works today. But nowadays, we might want to have a bit of a more advanced method of handling this. So how I like to do it is that in this case, for example, here we can say that everyone needs to know how to book leave, for example, or phishing attacks. Let's talk about phishing attacks. So in this case, we are including a link on YouTube that has been approved by management for this demo company for training on phishing attempts. Okay, we've assigned this training to be repeated every 2 years. Okay, we're going to decide whether it's going to be included on onboarding or not, and it is available to all employees. Okay, and by doing that, we are able to determine who are the people who have a need to do this training, okay, and who are the people who have actually completed this training. And this would serve as a training record for you to know who has completed which training. I think that the time where we're tracking the training manually for people has passed. I think that nowadays we're moving into a fast-paced world where changes are happening constantly. So if you've updated, for example, the remote working policy, You don't need to remember and do it manually to have to send the updated version of the remote working policy to all employees and manually try to get them to all reply to you to confirm that they've understood and agree with the updated remote working policy, but rather by using a software like MissFrog, once you update the remote working policy, the software would automatically know who are the people who are linked to that particular policy, and the software would automatically communicate with them that there has been an update, and the software would keep on reminding them to confirm that they have read and understood the new changes that are available within the remote working policy. So that is something that is very important when it comes to the training plan and training records. Okay. Job descriptions, as I've mentioned earlier, they have to have the roles and responsibilities, but also the competencies. Typically, job descriptions would always have the roles and responsibilities. More often than not, I see job descriptions without competencies. Make sure to include competencies for each job description in terms of what they need to know relating to information security. There has to be a training plan for each person within the organization to make sure that if there are any certifications or licenses that are expected by that person to do their job, make sure to include those, but also to include other topics that would help in you meeting your strategy for information security. So for example, not being vulnerable to phishing attempts, to make sure that everyone is aware of their responsibilities within the management system, etc. We need to have a training plan for all employees to cover that topic. There has to be a due date for each training session or a due month for each training session on when it's going to be done. And for each training session, we can determine whether it's going to happen once or whether it is recurring. Okay? Training records could be or rather is some type of physical proof, whether it's soft copy or hard copy, it hardly makes any difference, but it has to be physical proof that a person has been trained on a particular topic irrespective of the method of delivery. So this can relate to training by universities, accredited or non-accredited training, courses delivered online or in person, on-the-job training or others. For example, this type of training course that you are doing right now, and even seeing the specific module in itself, would mean that you have had some type of training, if not on all the topics. At least if you saw this video, it means that you've had training on clause 7.2 of ISO 27001. Okay, so that is evidence that you've done this particular training course. Now, the certifications obtained when finishing this course are a prime example of training records, but there are myriad other examples of training records that you could have. For example, having tasks completed on a software like I've showed you earlier. So any tasks, any training that had to be done over here. I think that there isn't anything done specific for this demo company, but if we were to see training, okay, for example, in this training, what is ISO 27001? This has been assigned to this person. When this person marks this training as completed, we're going to have a record of when the training was assigned and when it was completed. Okay, and that is the type of granularity that we would want to have in our training records. Less is more. Don't go overboard in the details of your job description and training program. Try to use automated tools that will keep your job descriptions, training plans, and training records updated automatically, so you don't need to waste a lot of admin and manual time chasing people to update this type of information, but try to leverage technology as much as possible to help you with the execution of these tasks. Okay? That is all I had to say for this particular topic. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I am very happy to help you. Thank you so much.